today I'm very pleased to have Jon Davies, the recently appointed CEO of the Australian Contractors Association, with me. Good afternoon, Jon, and thanks very much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
Okay, so we might just start off with a little bit of background information. Tell us your story, Jon, a little bit, your journey so far and how you've, like I said, recently, I'm just aware that you've just recently taken up this role, so a little bit about the Jon Davies story.
Yeah, sure, thanks. I'll try and keep it relatively brief because, as you can probably tell, it's been quite a long story. But originally from the UK, as you might guess from the accent, left 24 years ago. Had quite a bit of time working in the Middle East, Singapore, and have been here in Australia now for 14 years. My background is major contractors, working in a commercial capacity, commercial and contracts capacity. And 5 years ago, I went out on my own and have a couple of consulting businesses, one focused on lean construction, which is something that I'm quite interested in. And a couple of years ago, I was approached to become the CEO of the Queensland Major Contractors Association. This was not a career path that I'd particularly thought about before, but I thought this could work out quite well because by this stage of my career, especially spending a lot of time dealing with contracts and commercial, which is all constant biff, as you'll know, Michael, I was keen to do something a bit more positive. So that was always, for me, going to be a sort of 2 to 3 year gig, I always thought. And at the start of this year, I'd just done my 2 years. And along came COVID. And as with a lot of people, it has really changed things for me. I saw in COVID, like a lot of people do, an opportunity for change. It's become a little bit cliche to say this, but I see an opportunity, a once in a generation opportunity to make the industry more sustainable. And I started off looking to advocate for that and do some thought leadership in that space, and quickly sort of came to the conclusion that there's a limit to how far you can push things from here in Queensland. So I started to contact other associations, in particular the Australian Constructors Association, and said, what are you guys doing about it? Really need to pull your socks up. Don't see you doing a great deal here. And they said, well, funnily enough, Jon, we're actually looking for a full-time CEO, and would you be interested? And well, as they say,
the rest is history. Yeah. So I know we touched on it briefly the other day. We were just having a pre-meeting chat. The difference between the Major Contractors Association, which I was an active follower of your articles and your contributions, and that association also, and this organisation. I think you said to me the other day, it's a bit like moving one to the other on steroids. But other than the magnitude of the issue, what are some of the challenges? I've been through your board members today, and a very impressive lot of board members, but they would keep you on your toes.
Yeah, they're a very demanding bunch. That's for sure. And I guess that's the exciting thing for me about this new role is that from a membership perspective and from a size of business perspective, they don't become any bigger than our members. And so they are influential in their own right, but put together under the Australian Constructors Association banner, we get a very good audience when we come to talk to people about particular issues. So that is the opportunity, I guess, with this role, is to leverage that influence to achieve real change.
Yeah, and one of the things, as I was scrolling through preparing for this, is that, and I'm just going to look right, sorry everybody, to my other screen, but the objectives of the association, and I should read them, there's 5, and I'll just very quickly, to be authoritative voice for major construction contractors to promote, that's number 1. Number 2, to promote the highest standards of integrity, quality, safety and wellbeing across the construction industry. Number 3, we'll come back to this one, to influence the construction industry policy development. Number 4, to develop a sustainable pipeline of construction work. And number 5, to promote the construction industry as a great place to work and build a career. I love easily digestible objectives, so that's nice. The policy one. I've got a view that generally associations haven't been effective in this area. So I'll just throw it out there. What do you think to that comment, and whether or not you're going to be making some changes to the way in which the ACA tries to advocate on behalf of its members?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's one of the reasons why ACA have made the appointment of a full-time CEO. It's partly a recognition of the fact that they potentially haven't been as successful as they'd like to have been in the last 10 years or so in terms of achieving real policy change. I mean, that they've had the view that it's best to have conversations behind closed doors and to try to influence things privately. But the reality is as you say, you know, how successful has that been? The industry is in extremely poor health at the moment. We've got, especially here in Queensland, some very interesting policy coming out of government that isn't particularly helpful. And it's time for a different approach. And so from from an ACA perspective, what you will see is a much more outward focus, looking to build, I hate using these terms, these buzzword terms, but a social license for that change, to get the public on board with change. We're pretty hopeless as an industry in terms of celebrating the stuff that we do and the contribution that we make. You know, that we employ close to 10% of the working population. We contribute, well, it varies, but, you know, on average about 8% of GDP. It's a huge industry, especially when you take into account the number of smaller businesses that are employed in the supply chain. And so, but we don't do a good enough job of explaining that. And I think that that is part of the problem. I think if there was a better understanding of just how important construction industry is for the economy and for society of Australia, there would be more opportunity to influence things and we would have more success. So that is certainly going to be a focus for us, to provide that platform, but to do a better job of explaining what needs to change and how that change can be realised.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. One of the sole purposes I've written over 100 articles now in the last 3 years, and quite frankly, a lot of my articles are literally with the intention of throwing red meat out into the lion's den. I don't care how it's devoured. I don't care whether or not people want to argue with me, tell me I'm mad. I'd welcome it. But I just want people to get engaged. I want them to think about their industry, and I want them to think about it when there are concepts or beliefs or policies starting to be floated in the first instance, and don't put it back to try to argue at the 11th hour. Because I think that's one of the things that has happened in the past, is that when you track some of the policy development, there has been, in inverted commas, consultation, but there hasn't been much engagement. Mm. There's a difference between consulting with industry associations and engaging with the members. So that's my sort of general view on early engagement with government. As soon as someone has an idea, or even better, to be proactive and to go to government and saying, we see a problem, we've got a solution, because governments love solutions. They don't just, don't just sit back and wait for somebody else to come up with a solution.
Well, that's a great point, and that's exactly why, and it's a good prompt for me to talk to you about what we've got planned in that area. We very much recognise that. So we've got a number of key initiatives that we're bringing out, thought leadership pieces that we're about to publish in the next 6 to 8 weeks, that very much do just that. So we'll be starting out in the next couple of weeks publishing our response to the 2019 IA infrastructure audit, which identifies a number of problems in delivering the infrastructure that they believe Australia needs. But they call on industry to suggest how those problems can be overcome. So we're going to do just that. It's very much an evidence-based document that specifically identifies these issues or reinforces these issues. But more importantly, comes up with 10 recommendations for how they can be addressed. one of those recommendations is that industry needs to align on the key ingredients for a sustainable construction industry. What do we need to address to fix this sustainability issue? And without giving too much away, we believe that there are three pillars to this, to a sustainable construction industry. And they are the culture of industry, improving the culture of industry, commercial frameworks, and capability, capacity, and skills. And we talk about how all of those three areas are interlinked. You can't just focus on one, you need to focus on all three if you're going to address the sustainability problem. And probably the best example of that is that if you take our current commercial frameworks that the majority of contracts are let under, they encourage very adversarial behaviors.
Yeah.
And those adversarial behaviors then impact on the culture of the industry, and that culture impacts on our ability to attract and retain people into the industry. So they're all interlinked. And then the final document that we will be issuing will be a really important document, which will be industry's commitments to a sustainable construction industry. So we, as you know, as an industry, we've got probably a right reputation for sitting in the corner and whinging and complaining and saying, woe is me, and it's everyone else's fault but our own. Well, this document is actually going to set out 10 key areas that industry does have a capability to change and will hold itself accountable to change in these areas. So this will provide us, I'm hoping, a very good platform for having conversations with the particularly federal government, but also state governments in terms of driving the sort of changes that we need to see.
Yeah, and I know to a certain extent, if you've got a good sort of strategic process, it doesn't matter where the political cycle is. You know, you can almost ignore in an ideal world, you would ignore the political cycle because you're just continuing advancing in a strategy that works in early engagement, and you're continually going to government, whatever government's in power and whatever stage they're at. But I suppose right now the opportunity for you, certainly in Queensland, is that you are coming up to a state election, so there'll be some certainty one way or the other for 3 years going on up from October. And like you said before, from a Commonwealth government perspective, or from a very broad government perspective, you do have COVID to be able to latch on to in this particular situation and try to get some really clear, good policy settings in place.
Yeah, that's true. From a Queensland perspective, to start with, I think there's a bit of a concern that we won't have actually. That there's a possibility we end up with the worst of both worlds in that we have a minority government. And now we're moving to 4-year terms for a 4-year period. So there's a wee bit of concern there. We are working with QMCA to shortly issue our election wish list, if you like, to the Queensland government, and it will contain things like, and you like this one, Michael, I know, depoliticising the QBCC. But I'll come back to that one. But the COVID opportunity, just to pick you up on your COVID opportunity, the COVID opportunity, just to explain that to everyone, because everyone hears everyone saying, it presents an opportunity. Well, how does it present an opportunity? Well, from a construction perspective, the opportunity is that government is very much relying on our industry to lead us out of recession.
Yeah.
It's a well-known fact that for every dollar you spend on construction, or more particularly in infrastructure, there's a $3 kick on to the wider economy. So that's why in times of recession, governments look to pump money into construction. So, but not only do they want to do that, and they're wanting to do quite a few projects and pump a lot of money into this area. So there's a concern about the capability and capacity and skills to deliver that. So the government is very keen to work with industry to look at what are the constraints on capability, capacity, and skills. And then that comes back to those three interlinked pillars I talked about, which is fixing up the commercial frameworks and fixing up the culture side of things. But there's another aspect as well, which is they're keen with all this money that they're spending to absolutely maximize the social and economic benefits that they get out of that. And the best way to do that, as you'll know, is through increased collaboration with industry. So more collaborative commercial frameworks where these sorts of things can actually be incentivized, these better outcomes can be incentivized. Unfortunately, some jurisdictions, not naming any names, like to take a big stick approach to achieving these outcomes. But I think there's a better way, and hopefully we're going to get that better way.
Yeah, it's so true. I've written a lot of articles, and I've got a general belief that in the past we have tried to solve the problems, and this is all governments, have tried to solve the problems of the government from the top down. And my belief, and I think you just said the same thing, is that, well, that hasn't really worked. So, it's the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again. You've got to build, I think the industry's got to almost shape itself and reset itself from the bottom up, which is essentially governments working very hard to collaborate with all the diverse sectors of the industry. And I'm not saying it's easy, because there are very diverse representations of different stakeholder priorities to the industry, but it has to be from the bottom up, and then you get a consensus. And then if you've got needed legislation, you can deliver something which has got consensus attached to it, not just consultation. There's a huge difference between getting a consensus position which is embraced in legislation or getting just a consultation tick-off, which has got no government, which hasn't got broad industry consensus.
No, that's right. And again, recent experience, that consultation, even that level of consultation, has been pretty poor, to the extent of some specific examples of a document being put on the table to a whole bunch of industry representatives who are told, you've got an hour to read that document, give us your feedback and hand that document back. And that's it. That's your consultation. And that is pretty poor. You're exactly right. There needs to be proper bottom-up approach to developing the solutions that the industry needs. And the other important thing I think to make here is that the industry is a huge industry. You have everyone from the companies that Australian Constructors represent, I guess if you like, the bigger contractors, the tier one contractors, all the way through to the mum and dad contractors. Then you've got the different sectors. You've got the house building sector, which is different from the civil infrastructure sector, which is different from the commercial build sector, construction services, oil and gas. And yet, unfortunately, governments have a very poor understanding of those nuances that we have within industry. And so when they see a problem within one sector of that industry, they then think, well, that's a problem with the whole sector, and we'll bring in a piece of legislation to try and address that. But then that has a whole bunch of unintended consequences for those sectors that problem doesn't really apply to. So it was interesting, actually, going off tangent a little bit here.
No, you're right.
But one of the things that another COVID opportunity, we've started having dialogues with worker representation organisations, if I couldn't call them that. And one of the things that they raised the same thing. They said that, and this was probably more in relation to the level 4 restrictions that are currently in place down in Victoria, and they brought in down there a particular restriction around commercial build. So any sort of, I can't remember, it's 3 stories and above commercial build, they capped the workforce at 25% peak. And well, do you really understand the implications of that? It's not just, it sounds easy, doesn't it? It sounds really easy, but the ramifications of that are that the vast majority of sites, it wasn't worth them continuing. They may as well just close up shop. But that just emphasizes the fact that governments just don't understand how industry works. And one of the things that we may be looking to do with that particular association, Workers' Representation Association, is do an education piece around that to government and to try to better inform them how our industry operates.
Couldn't agree more. And I think this is where there's responsibility of individual contractors or participants to buy into the process. So join an association, I'm talking to the contractors now, or join somebody who become engaged through an industry association or become engaged directly yourself. But if contractors want to solve the problems, they're going to have to buy into the process and not just leave it up to industry associations, a few around a policy sort of table to try to argue on their behalf. And that's what I think part of the problem is that I know, but the problem is it's so busy, it's so challenging. The sector is so diverse with so many different pressure points, like you said, and there's over 90,000 licensed contractors in Queensland, for instance, right now, who have got an entitlement to operate a business through their particular licensing. That to me is like, well, there wouldn't be 90,000 people equipped to run a business in Queensland from a contractor's point of view, but we've given a licensing sort of tick to them. So that it opens up all sorts of things where industry and individual participants haven't engaged or haven't bitten hard enough down to solve the problems. Continual professional development. I could go on and on and on about some of the stuff here that it's also the responsibility of the participants to step up here, not just the industry associations. If you want to change, if the government needs to be convinced, well, individuals are going to have to come to the party here.
Yeah, that's right. There was one of the problems that we face. Another problem that we face as an industry, we've got many, is that if you compare us as an industry with other industries, you look at the medical industry, for example, or you look at the accountancy industry. There's one peak body or two peak bodies. You come to the construction industry, and there's literally hundreds. If you go out in the Master Plumbers Association and that sort of level, there's literally hundreds of us. In fact, sometimes I say it's a bit like the scene from Monty Python Life of Brian. It's People's Front of Judea, now we're the Judeans People's Front. And it's like we need to work more closely together. And one of the key things that I'm looking at doing in my role here is to try to reach out to some of those other industry associations to identify the overlap of interest, and I think that it's really significant overlap of interest when it all comes down to it, and try to to come together to push for change. But the other point you raised is another very valid point, that we as an industry are quite often our own worst enemies. We will agree things around a table as an industry association. I've got to be careful what I say here in case there's any competition law experts tuning in. But within reason, we agree that as an industry we shouldn't be taking on these inappropriate risk allocations, and yet there'll be a project that'll come out with just that inappropriate risk allocation, and half a dozen people lining up to bid it.
Absolutely.
So, we are our own worst enemies. But the COVID opportunity, again, keep coming back to the COVID opportunity. The other opportunity is the fact that there is so much work out there now in certain sectors, and it is spread. Different sectors are a little bit more affected, but certainly, say for example, in the civil infrastructure space, there's plenty of work coming up. So now, if we were ever going to do that, and if we're ever going to stick to our guns and say, well, look, no, we're only going to do things that there's an appropriate risk allocation in there, an appropriate and aligned commercial framework in there, now is the time to be doing that. Yeah,
it is. I hate to sort of forcefully make the COVID situation sound better than what it is, but it does present an opportunity. A crisis like this does present an opportunity, a once-in-a-life opportunity to meaningfully engage, not just with government, but the point that you said, there's all the different segments of the industry, all the different parties. We've got more in common than we haven't got in common with each other. The problem is that in some instances, there's been a divide and conquer type thinking about things, and also a little bit like, the big solutions. It's everything's got to be a big solution. Everything's got to be a big piece of legislation. And to my way of thinking, it's the need for the industry to work together to come up with solutions, and then to go to government on a continuous basis and just fix it bit by incrementally, bit by bit by bit. And the other thing about incremental change is it can be absorbed much better rather than sort of a big bang change. And we've had this debate around security of payment and trusts and everything like that. It's project bank accounts. That was just like got a problem and we're going to fix it by this massive disruption to the industry.
Yep.
Without, in my view, properly examining all the other existing legislative options which are on the table, which to my way of thinking hadn't been properly exhausted. Now, every government does it. You just keep on piling like barnacles on a ship. You just keep on piling legislation on top of legislation on top of legislation without ever fully exhausting the previous legislation opportunities.
Yeah, that's right, and there's a few points to pick up on there. One is coming back to that sledgehammer to crack a nut for where you've got a specific problem associated with a small sector of industry, and yet you bring in legislation that tries to fix that, but it applies to the whole of the industry and adds a whole level of administration and cost into the process. But the other thing is that I think legislation is going to be a last resort. I think that if we fix the sustainability issue, it's all a sustainability issue at the end of the day. Everyone's fighting to stay alive because we don't have a setup where contractors are appropriately reimbursed for the work that they do. If everyone's making a reasonable amount of money, there won't be the problem, half the problems that we've got as an industry. So, and they're also the other point you raised about adding the barnacles to the ship. I think one of the good things that's happened over the last few months is that government, through COVID, to try to expedite progress and get people employed, has been looking at those barnacles and saying, well, which ones can we remove? And from a process point of view, looking at the planning process and saying, well, do we really need that step in the process? And no, we don't. Why did we have that again? Oh, I can't remember. Oh, okay, we'll get rid of that. But what really struck me out of that is, well, why does it take a crisis for us to have that conversation? Shouldn't there be a government department that is purely focused on undertaking periodic reviews of old legislation and going through what is essentially, putting my lean hat on here, a value stream mapping process, where we just map out the process and go, which one of those bits of the process actually adds value and is worthwhile here? And if it doesn't add value, get rid of it.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I read an article a while ago called "A Fairer and Better Construction is Feasible If We Change Our Thinking." And I wrote down, I had 7 change items. So the first one was governments must entrust the industry to reshape itself. We just had a talk about that. Second one, clients must cease being unduly focused on the cheapest price. So there's an issue associated with, you talk about sustainability, there's some clients that have to face up to some reality here. Third thing, which we've spoken about, there must be appropriate allocation of contractual risk. The party that's best equipped to wear the risk should wear it. It shouldn't be just a race to the bottom to disseminate risk. Because you're going to end up with the party least equipped to wear that risk contractually wearing it. Fourth change, there must be a much greater emphasis on settling disputes rather than just going to the corners and sort of coming out fighting. Fifth, industry supply chains must be reviewed to ensure there are alternatives. Well, that's a given as a result of COVID. I'm going to get you to comment on this one, but the sixth one was the industry ceased dragging its feet and commence embracing opportunities arising from the fourth industrial revolution. Now, in this particular part, I quoted you wrote an article under the previous role of a major contract association called the Fourth Industrial Revolution, what it means, COVID, Construction 4.1, the case for an urgent COVID rebate of the construction industry. And you spoke about the missed opportunities over the 20 years, and BIM really hasn't delivered outcomes. Anything you want to add to that? Anything that...
Yeah, well, I think it's very true, and I think that was my essentially job application for.
I bet it was.
But it's very simple. I think it really is simple about that sustainability issue. Why the importance of that sustainability issue is that there's not going to be investment in these future technologies and future processes that will lead to substantial improvements in productivity and investment in people until we fix the sustainability problem, because industry contractors are just focused on staying alive. I mean, it sounds like I'm making a big thing about overblowing it, but there's a real profitability problem out there. There has to be. That's why there's so many contractors going out of business. And so if contractors, all they're focused on is from one project to the next, it's making money, or if you lose money, right, I've got to win the next project to keep the cash flow in, and hopefully I'm going to make enough money to make up for the losses on the last job. That is the pure focus for most contractors these days. And while they're focused on that, do you think they're focused on investing in BIM? Do you think they're focused on investing in construction? No.
I couldn't agree more. Because what's happening right now is, you had a conversation about the fourth industrial revolution. Essentially, the fifth industrial revolution is upon us now. And once again, there's innovation opportunities and things like that. But the contractors, probably the same in your role. At least 2 to 3 hours of my day, every single day, is scrolling through, getting updates, reading information, myself trying to keep up to date. How the hell a contractor can do it? It's and particularly in a crisis like this, it's just heads down, bum up. They're working hard, and in some instances, they are making what I would call poor decisions under pressure to essentially buy jobs, which is a form of cannibalising. But I understand why it's happening, because it's hard to be overly critical, because it's a very tough industry. But if this cannibalisation doesn't stop, nothing's going to change. And it gets back to your point. The industry's got to be sustainable for everybody.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, whilst obviously industry can do something to help itself in that area, there has to be some effort by some of the major client organisations to lead the way here. I mean, we had some very good conversations in QMCA days with Department of Transport, where they were pretty good in terms of recognising the problem, and that they needed a sustainable construction industry to support them in their programme of works. And so we started, and these conversations are ongoing, conversations around more collaborative ways of procuring and delivering projects. But simple things like they have the unusually low bid rules that rejects a tender that's 20% lower than the next highest, or whatever it is. And historically, they haven't always followed through with that. They've listened to a contractor that says, well, you know what, I've got these great innovations that are going to, that's why I'm 20% cheaper. And you know what, where are those innovations going to go on duplicating a straight bit of road? I mean, it's been a long time since there's been any real innovation in that space. So, really, you've got a part to play in all of this as well, in helping industry to help itself.
Couldn't agree more. And the other thing too is, I think I might have picked it up in your previous role, but I think there was some collaboration with Transport and Main Roads to make the COVID contracts less adversary. And I think, I'm integral. I like to think I'm an integral part of the law firm. But I'm not actually a lawyer, but so I look at things from a different perspective from our wonderful lawyers. But the last thing parties want to do right now is to be arguing about liquidated damages, delay costs, everything like that. So, if there are contracts which embrace this collaboration and just trying to work out settlements, because that's the other thing too, is if the tendering process needs to be looked at, but the contracts need to be looked at.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. They do, and I've got to give credit to DTMR that they're certainly, from a Queensland government delivery agency, they're a shining light in terms of their willingness to look at these issues and to be collaborative. Those conversations around amending those contracts to address those particular issues were very collaborative. Our QMCA and CCF work very closely there with our members to agree on a suite of changes that could then be negotiated on a project by project basis, but they form the starting point to address all those issues. But we need to, from a contract perspective, I mean, we could talk for hours on this subject alone. The need for more standardized contracts,
yep.
More simpler contracts. I'm often talking using NEC as an example of that. It doesn't have to be NEC, but it's a good example. But when we have those standard contracts, because we do have a set of standard contracts here in Australia, the AS contracts, but when was the last time you saw an unamended version of that? And it's when you start changing those contracts that then you have to get legal advice to review those contracts. The people that are administering those contracts don't understand the contracts. The contracts get further amended to try to pick up on particular issues and close what are perceived loopholes, but they're amended by people that don't understand what they're doing, so that they amend something here, but they don't amend something there. You have circular problems occurring within the administration of the contract, and then you end up where we are today with the mess that we have today.
Yeah. As someone, I can say this as the non-lawyer in Helix, I find that's the least attractive thing of my working life is it's part of what I've actually been embroiled in. But disputes, nobody wins in a dispute. Nobody wins in a dispute. Even if you're a winner, you're normally paying a lawyer something, so you don't win. And a lot of the contracts have almost self-generated disputes because they've been so one-sided. And this is one of the things I've always said to people. Why, if you're a principal handing down a contract to a builder and it's a take it or leave it contract, and it's such a one-sided contract, and I could go from builder to subcontractor, and everyone feels, the upstream party feels good because they've got all the contractual rights. I just say the more what you're doing is you're going to drive disputes. You're going to cause a dispute. You're going to cause a dispute over poor workmanship, poor supervision. There's going to be a breakdown of relationships, which is just going to turn this particular project into a crap heap, so to speak. So How do you win? You might feel good that you've got a good contract supposedly on your side, but you don't win.
Well, the examples I give with that, Michael, it is starting to change, certainly on a major project perspective, because there's an article I wrote about this, about the one risk that clients cannot transfer. So they try and pass as much risk as possible over to the contractor and develop these great long bespoke contracts to do so. But there's one risk that they can't transfer, and that is reputational risk.
Yeah.
And so what you see, and there's been a number of high-profile examples of this down in Sydney Metro, where that job, I was going to say went off the rails. That'd be a bit of a pun, but it had a whole bunch of problems, and so you've got all these sort of fencing up still in George Street, and all the local shopkeepers up in arms about it, and they didn't start knocking on ASSI owners' shed hut doors and saying, "Bloody hell, what are you doing about it?" They went and spoke to Transport for New South Wales and said, "What are you doing about it?" Up here in Queensland, you've got Kingston Smith Drive, which is another great example, excuse me, where the council sought to transfer every possible risk over to the contractor. Those risks materialised in terms of utilities, in terms of geotech, and risks with the river. and the project ran over massively. And so you've got the shopkeepers in Racecourse Road complaining about loss of trade. They don't go and speak to Lend-Lease and say, what are you doing about it? They go and give council grief about it. And in both those instances, the clients, those clients are forced then to negotiate with a contractor to say, help, make the pain go away. What do we need to do to make the pain go away? And obviously the contractor is going to say, well, a bit of money might help. But you've got this situation where, well, what was the point in doing that in the first place? And DTMR, again, I'm giving a few reps to DTMR here, but I think it's appropriate to do so. They sort of said, well, look, they've already recognised, look, John, we don't go to court. We're the government. We rarely, when was the last time the government went to court to settle a dispute over a road job of some description or other? We don't do it. We always end up settling because that with the government, that's what we do. So if we're always going to settle, what is the point? Why don't we address the contractual framework to make it far more collaborative and enjoy the process along the way? We'll end up paying the same. Hopefully we're going to get much better value out of it. And this is an important point for our industry. The mental health of everyone involved in that process is going to be so much better because we're not having a blue every day.
Yeah, I spent 22 years with the building regulator, and I was now 3 or 4 years with Helix. There is the angst that you see as a result of disputes. Subcontractor to builder to client. It's part of my day every single day, it's just a terrible, and right now it's even a worse environment right now because obviously there's all other sorts of pressure points coming on, particularly financial pressure points. If you're the contractor, you want to be paid, and if you're the client, you may well have some tightening above you. Like in one situation where I spoke to this week, from your financial facility might have been re-examined as a result of, so there's a lot of new pressures on, but at least, this most recent one I just referred to, there was a genuine willingness on behalf of our client that they were going to want to settle and negotiate because they were wanting to preserve a commercial relationship. And I think that's really, that's a mature way of looking at things rather than just going for the jugular and hoping to get a big win, which you may get, but so much for the commercial relationship in the future.
Yeah, no, that's right. I keep coming back to the opportunity that we have. I mean, I think everyone agrees what the problems are. We just need to get together and to fix them.
Yeah. Look, one of the things which I know I shared with you before, but I know that it sort of speaks to the fact that a lot of parties are coming together at the same position. So Infrastructure Australia shared this 10-point, which I think you shared too, or you'd liked, this 10-point principles underpinning an infrastructure recovery as far as they're concerned. I'm not going to read out all 10, and we'll put them up when we dissect these and put them out again. We'll make sure that they're in the background. But there was one again which picks up on your point, and it was number 8, I think, from memory. And I'll read that one: increased collaboration and openness in contracting. So it's good that major umbrella associations are starting to see things through the same prism.
Yeah, it is, and especially so given that this is a federal government agency that is saying this. I think that the missing link in achieving real change is the feds jumping on board and exerting some influence here. We've tried with state governments. So that in New South Wales and Victoria, you've got the Construction Industry Leadership Forum, which is those two governments and ACA, which has been around for 2 years and starting to get some traction, and there's some good stuff happening there. Here in Queensland, when I was at QMCA, contacted the government, and we initiated the Infrastructure Industry Steering Committee, which was a similar process to push for change. But ultimately, there's got to be an appetite for that change, or there's got to be some pressure to adopt that change. There's starting to become a burning platform for change within the state, so that's good. But I think there's also an opportunity for the feds to push down. They, from a major infrastructure perspective, they pay the lion's share of the cost for these projects. So any sort of major road project or hospital project or whatever, you're looking at a contribution of around 80% of the cost of it. So that's significant. But I went down to Canberra last year, my first sort of trip to walk the halls of Parliament House down there and meet some people. And one of there was a couple of key takeaways for me. One was the fact that as compared to 1 William Street, people seem to be walking around with a whole lot more purpose to their day job. But that maybe I should be careful what I say. But the other thing was the fact that they advised us that they don't put any substantial preconditions on how that money is spent. I think the only thing is the Aboriginal Indigenous content, the 3% content, is the only thing that precondition that they put on that spend. And I just said, this is absolutely crazy. You're trying to, as a government, you're trying to drive a productivity agenda. You're trying to improve the nation's economic productivity. Why, just taking that as an example, why aren't you using that to drive initiatives that are going to lead to improved productivity? And so one of the things that come about of those sort of 3 documents I mentioned earlier and the process that we're going to go forward with, we're going to look to try to engage potentially IA as the vehicle for this. And that's why I was quite pleased to see that they come out with this, to push for change within the states and to, I'd like to say incentivize, because we're always talking about incentivization rather than big sticks, but governments always seem to just prefer the big sticks. But if there's some ways to incentivize that, I think that the feds have got a really big part to play in that.
Well, they've got the money.
Yeah.
It's a fair leverage point, which you're quite right. I've seen it tried to be put conditions attached to it before, and it's sort of, I don't know. They've never been able to exert the influence that I think they're entitled to exert over the build, so to speak. But once again, we're in unique times, and COVID will dictate every minute lost, every day lost in terms of getting jobs, to use a hackney phrase, shovel ready and all that sort of stuff, getting money right, getting the work commenced and the money flowing. The community are going to look very, very poorly upon governments who don't play a role in it, and I don't care what government it is.
Mm.
If you start seeing, return to the old sort of adversary, sort of go back to your corners and come out, I think the punters are going to judge governments really, really poorly if that happens.
Yeah, I hope so.
So one of the things that and it's a great industry, so I need to phrase that in that context, but I do think we need to talk about the ABS figures today. And I shared with you, which I'm sure you would have seen, the heading, COVID wipes 2.7 billion from construction economic contribution. But when you dig into those figures, it shows an industry with different gears, doesn't it? So maybe I'll allow you to put the words in from your perspective about what this shows where we are right now.
Yeah, it's. I guess it comes back to the point about the industry, how big the industry is, and there are different sectors within that industry. And I was talking to someone about this the other day, and I don't know whether there's any research being done into this, but I've always noticed how the commercial build sector runs counter-cyclical to the infrastructure sector. So when the infrastructure sector seems to be buoyant, the commercial build sector is down, and vice versa. There's been only a few times where I've seen them running in sync. Currently, it's very much the same. So you've got the civil infrastructure sector that is really ticking along quite reasonably well. It's reasonably unaffected by COVID, partly because of the nature of the works. When you think about a road job or a pipeline job, it's spread out, so you can get your social distancing. So whilst there are some impacts to how that work's undertaken, it's not as significant as commercial build, where you've got a lot of people in a small space, and so that is very much impacted by measures that you bring in to mitigate COVID. But the commercial build sector was already struggling from where they were in their investment cycle, and so my understanding is that is starting to turn now, and we as an association are trying to encourage government to look at more investment in sort of social infrastructure, which is more that sort of that type of vertical construction versus horizontal construction.
Yep.
I'll be honest, for me, it's a wee bit of a learning curve. I'm a bit of a roads and bridges person, and the commercial side has been a bit of a learning curve for me. But we as an organisation do represent all sectors, actually 3 sectors. I suppose that's quite a good plug for the new logo up in the back.
Yes.
Just a bit of a brief explanation of that, and if you go to the website, you'll see a nice actual little sketch that shows the genesis of that logo. But it is the 3 sectors. So you've got the vertical going up, you've got the horizontal roads and bridges, and you've got construction services like pipelines and utilities as well. And those 3 sectors are affected differently. And the construction services sector, again, is another one that's been heavily impacted by COVID. So those figures, if you go into the detail of those output figures, you'll see that you'll see that the civil infrastructure sector is doing reasonably well, and I anticipate that is going to go up even further with government's investment in infrastructure. The commercial build and the services sector are doing less well, but I envisage that they will also pick up towards the end of the year.
Yeah, I think the commercial sector is still going to be heavily dependent upon what happens with the opening of the Australian borders, so to speak. So, migration really plays a pivotal role in so much of what is built in that sort of mid-tier commercial activity. And of course, universities flow into that, and student accommodation and everything like that. There's a whole lot of complex issues associated with that. So from my perspective, if I was to generalise, I think at the moment the house building sector is being stimulated, and there's an argument maybe falsely stimulated, because it may be a cliff down the road somewhere in terms of the home building grant that the Commonwealth Government have home building sort of stimulus package, $25,000. The bigger stuff, the stuff that you're more attuned to, is obviously going to get a good run with the bringing forward of, or hopefully the bringing forward of a lot of spending in terms of road and infrastructure. It's this middle tier that everybody I speak to, from the HIA to the master builders, this middle, I call middle commercial tier. It's just going to be hard to predict what happens there. Like I said, a lot of it will depend upon immigration.
Yeah, you're right. I think government can do more to stimulate that sector, but it emphasises the need, when we talk about sustainable pipelines of work, that it's sustainable from a point of view of all the different industry sectors, but within those sectors, all of the different levels within those sectors. So you're not just putting out a whole bunch of big projects that only the large contractors can bid for. You're providing opportunities all the way through. And I think governments have generally done a reasonable job in terms of, from a stimulus perspective, focusing on some of the smaller scale projects and maintenance related projects that can come out a lot quicker and can provide job opportunities a lot quicker. Because from a point of view of bringing forward jobs, it's just not that easy. I mean, people talk about bringing forward shovel-ready projects, and the gestation period and planning period for these big projects is a long period of time, and some jurisdictions have done better jobs of building up a number or a portfolio of projects that they can that are at a stage that they can suddenly bring to market at times like this. Unfortunately, Queensland is not one of those. I regularly made a point of this in my time at QMCA about the poor job that was being done in that respect, and now we're finding ourselves being caught short. Most of these sorts of announcements that you've seen recently are stuff that was in the pipeline already. Because we're in an election year, there was a whole bunch of stuff ready to come out. As you would expect, pollies can't help themselves with a bit of good old pork barreling and standing in front of an excavator in a fluoro shirt 1 month out from an election. So all this stuff was coming anyway. There's nothing really new there. And that's a real concern, especially here in Queensland, that and this will be in our election wish list, that we need to address what is coming in the next couple of years' time. Otherwise, we have a real risk with shuffling these things forward, that what will happen in 2 years' time will just fall off a cliff.
Yeah. That's my problem with any of these sorts of initiatives, which are essentially just bringing work forward, already committed money, already essentially work forward. Unless there's a reaffirmation to come in and backfill, or using it, well, then there's going to be a cliff. There has to be a cliff, and we need to have this conversation now. It's a bit like, I can obviously see a cliff in relation to the house building, and in this particular article that we had a conversation about before, the HIA is essentially saying that there's going to be a cliff. So, the housing sector people need to have that conversation with the government right now. It's because don't leave it till the 11th hour.
Yeah.
Look, John, it's been fantastic. We've been banging on for almost an hour now, so I very much appreciate you making your time available. Is there anything you want to add? Is there a sort of little bow you want to tie around?
No, just probably to pick up on one of your first points, really, that everyone should get involved. Be an active participant in this. We're not going to achieve change if everyone just sits back and expects a few people to do this. It's very much needs everyone to get on board. Please, more than happy for anyone to get in touch with me directly, connect with me on LinkedIn and give me your thoughts and express your thoughts if you want to do that privately rather than publicly. But please get involved, get engaged. I sound like a union representative or something, but get involved, get engaged. And we really do, believe me, if we were ever going to have an opportunity to do something about this, it is now. That's why I'm here. But I'd just like to finish by thanking you, Michael, and Helix for giving me this opportunity, this soapbox, if you like, for a good old 1 hour round.
Yeah, you're like I said, we'll recirculate to you everything that we cut up, and you can reuse it to your own pleasure. But like I said, you can probably see that there's, I don't know, Emily will probably find about 15 little pieces of little things here that we'll tag and send through to you. So these things have a life of going around, and that's why I'm so appreciative for you to make yourself available. And I'm the same as you, John. I couldn't, like I said, I literally have got the thickest skin in the world. People can have a shot at me as much as they want, as long as they start thinking about the industry and they start making their voices heard. And that's number one. After that, we can sort of figure out ways of trying to collaborate and come together with some sort of purpose to get solve some of these problems. But on that note, thank you very, very much, and all the best, and I'll catch up with you.